Hi, I'm Shawn Thomas, and welcome to a teacher's overview of Lifeway's Explore the Bible lesson of Numbers chapter 13, verses 17 through 31, with the title of The Land for Sunday, September 21st, 2025. A way that you could begin the lesson this week would be to share the story of Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian obstetrician who lived in the 1800s. He was greatly concerned about the high rate of infection and resulting death in hospitals. He believed he knew the cause. And it was the doctors themselves who would often go from room to room, or even from autopsies in the morgue to a room to tend to a patient without washing their hands. He speculated that if doctors would cleanse themselves, it would cut down on the rate of infection. His colleagues didn't believe him. They didn't believe that they were the problem. He was widely ridiculed. He was eventually put into a mental asylum, where he died at age 47. But although Semmelweis was in the minority, he was absolutely right, as we now know. And today he's referred to as the father of hand hygiene. It's a good reminder to us that the majority is not always right. So you could begin by sharing that story or by sharing this discussion question. Can you share a time from history or from your own experience when the majority or popular opinion was wrong? And then conclude after your discussion by saying, in today's lesson, we'll see the majority is not always right, especially when they're acting in fear instead of by faith in God's word. And our passage for today challenges us to be people of faith who listen to God and follow him, even when he calls us to a difficult assignment. Our context this week, we're studying, continuing our study in the book of Numbers, the fourth book of the law. We've seen how after the book opens with the numbering of Israel's warriors, the census from which the book gets its name, God gave various commands to the priests, instructed his people to follow him day by day through the wilderness and in the fire by day and the pillar of the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. He also provided manna for them to eat, which the people grew tired of and grumbled, as we saw, displeasing God and causing great distress for Moses. Chapter 12 tells of more complaining, this time by Aaron and Miriam, which caused her to get leprosy for a time, and then ends with Israel camping in Paran. You may want to use a map like this one just to show where Israel is at this point. You get something like this. You can pull off the internet, and you might retrace Israel's journey as they leave Egypt and cross probably just over this tip of the Red Sea here, what we call today the Gulf of Suez goes into the Red Sea. They came down here to Mount Sinai, and now they're coming up to the wilderness of Paran here. So that's where Israel was in today's passage in Numbers 13, just south of Canaan, near Kadesh Barnea, theoretically poised and ready to enter into the promised land. Our outline for this week, you might do something like this. Point number 1, the reconnaissance of the spies, found in verses 17 through 24. Point 2, the report of the majority, found in verses 25 through 29. Then point 3, the reply of faith, found in verses 30 and 31. So let's go ahead and get into the text, Numbers 13, 17 through 31. And point 1, the reconnaissance of the spies, from verses 17 through 24. It says, when Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob at Lebo Hamath. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. So Numbers 13 opens up with God telling Moses to send out spies into the land of Canaan, which he promised to give them. They're to send one man, a leader from each of the tribes, to spy out the land. Deuteronomy 1:22 actually gives us another angle on this story. Moses there is reviewing the history for their history for Israel, and he says, "Then all of you approached me and said, 'Let us send men before us, that they may search out the land for us and bring back to us word of the way by which we should go up in the cities which we shall enter.'" So Deuteronomy says this idea of spying out the land first was Israel's idea, not God's. As Deuteronomy 1:23 says, Moses thought it was a good idea at first. He said, "The thing pleased me," and God allowed it. Verse 1 here says he commanded Moses to send them out. But of course, God knew what was in their hearts. The seeds of doubt were already there. Since God said, go, they should just go to the land. Go take it. He told them to take it, but they waffled. Let's go look at this first. And this sense of God just allowing it is actually reflected in the Hebrew text here in Numbers 13, 1 and 2, where the wording is, "Send out for yourselves men, that they may spy out the land." It doesn't take much to read between the line here that this is God's permissive will. Okay, do this for yourselves, but he knows where this is heading, and it's not heading to a good place. They're already showing doubt instead of faith, which we're going to see even more clearly by the end of this passage. So Moses sent the 12 spies out on what we'd call a recon mission. Of course, recon short for reconnaissance, a word of French derivation that means to recognize or to survey. They went out to scout out the land. Where were they to reconnoiter? Verse 17 says Moses told them go to the Negev and the hill country. Again, you might refer to a map here and then just show where these places are. The Negev, and they went all the way up to Hamath and Hebron and all these places you can find on a map like this, and kind of see that basically they just went up to the northern part, to the southern part of Israel, throughout the whole land. Verse 21 says they spied out the land from the wilderness of Hamath. They got to Hebron. They saw the descendants of Anak there. Verse 22 says Hebron, you can see is in the south central part of Canaan. And it says the descendants of Anak were there, giants, also known as Anakim. There's several references to the Anakim in Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. You can look those up if you want to. They're giants, as verse 33 says. "We became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." Deuteronomy 2:10 says the Emim lived there formerly, a people as great, numerous, and tall as the Anakim. So these people were tall. They were giants, likely predecessors of Goliath that David faced, whom 1 Samuel 17:4 says was 6 cubits in a span tall, or 9 feet 9 inches tall. The NIV Cultural Background Study Bible indicates these giants may be referenced in ancient Egyptian texts. Quote, the name Anak is associated with a people feared for their great size and military prowess. It may be found among the Egyptian execration texts of the early 2nd millennium BC. And an Egyptian letter from the 13th century BC describes warriors in Canaan that are 9 feet tall, just like Goliath. So there were giants in the land, but it wasn't all bad. Verse 23 says when they came to the valley of Eshcol, verse 20 says it was a time of the first ripe grapes. It says they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between 2 men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. One of my first memories as a child was seeing a drawing in our big family Bible storybook of a huge cluster of grapes on a pole between 2 men, pictorial representation of this story. Now, I've read where some people speculated the grapes were not particularly that big, that they were on a branch, was just the way they carried them, and the text does indicate they carried some pomegranates and some figs on it too. But if you do an internet search on large grapes in Israel, you might come up with a picture like this of grapes that are in Israel today. That is a huge cluster of grapes. It just gives support to the idea that the grapes were indeed large and lush in Eshcol, which, by the way, the word Eshcol means cluster. So verse 24 says they named the place the Valley of Eshcol, or the Valley of Clusters, the grape clusters, because of the grape clusters that were there. So that was the reconnaissance. They went through the whole land of Canaan. They found giant grapes as well as giant men. So in our next point, the 12 spies return and they give a report. Point 2, the report of the majority found in verses 25 through 29. It says, when they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. Then this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Verse 25 says they returned from their expedition after 40 days. It's roughly, I've read, about 240 miles in 40 days, 6 miles a day, very reasonable amount for them to have covered. The spies give their report. There's a positive aspect to it and a negative aspect. The positive aspects found in verse 27. We went in. It certainly does flow with milk and honey. This is its fruits. They probably showed them the cluster of grapes and the figs and pomegranates. Very impressive. The negative aspect of it, verses 28 and 29, starts with the word nevertheless. The first word here is the Hebrew epes. Nevertheless, it can mean but, nevertheless, etc., but it literally means a ceasing, an end, no further. In other words, they're saying, put an end to your thoughts about going into this land. Don't even think about it. Why? In verse 28, they indicate at least 3 reasons why they ought not go in. The people, the cities, and the giants. The people who live in the land are strong. The cities are fortified. And we saw the descendants of Anak there. So there were people, there were cities, there were giants. All these reasons not to go in. First of all, the people. They're saying, hey, this is not like this is just abandoned land. We can just come in and take up a dwelling place in. Verse 29 says, Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, that's the south by the desert. The Hittites and the Jebusites, the Amorites are living in the hill country, that's the central hilly part. The Canaanites are living by the sea and the side of the Jordan. So by the sea is where the Philistines lived, where the Palestinians now live, where Gaza became a city, and so on. So all these people are there. So all these people. Then secondly, the cities, the cities there, they're fortified. The Hebrew word means fenced, walled up. It comes from a word batzar. It means to be cut off. These cities were cut off from attack. You can't get to them. It's like how Jericho was, right? There was a wall around the city that prevented any army from attacking it. They're saying, you're not just going to go in and take this land. Somehow you have to scale these huge walls to even attack it. And then thirdly, there's the giants. All that's not to even mention the Anakim, the giants we read about, and the 9-foot tall warriors with the whole tribe of Goliaths that they would have to fight. So from a human standpoint, you can see why they'd be discouraged, right? These people, these walled cities, these giants, without God, there's no way they could take this land. Now, we might tend to think their situation was unique. We don't face any giants like that today, right? But we do face giants, don't we? In fact, I think you could use a discussion application question here and say something like, Israel faced some giants in Numbers 13. God's not calling us to fight any literal giants today, but what are some giants that he might call us to face as we do his will? Of course, you and your group can name many giants of fear or discouragement or anxiety or doubts or a lack of provision, lack of resources, lack of ability, big problems we don't see how we can handle, and so on. You and your group can name all kinds of giants that we might have to face today. As an illustration about giants, you might share how in John Bunyan's famous book, Pilgrim's Progress, he writes of how Christian, the main character, and his companion Hopeful fall asleep and are captured by the giant Despair, who lives in Doubting Castle. He throws them into his castle dungeon where he beats them and torments them, causing them to despair, hoping that they will take their own life. Christian and Hopeful finally remember they have the key promise with them, which opened all the doors of the dungeon, and they escaped. Well, of course, Bunyan's book is a very clear allegory. Like Israel, we today also face giants like discouragement, despair, anxiety, and so on. We need to remember we have God's promises, just like Christian did in that story. We need to claim those promises and move forward against those giants. In fact, here's a recent testimony you can share. It's from our own family. One of our daughters-in-law has some chronic health problems and contributes to a spirit of anxiety in her life. Just last week, she had a certain activity to face one day that was causing her a lot of anxiety. But she shared this testimony with us. She said, I prayed that God would take it away for the day, and he has come through. Everything went well, and most importantly, she said God helped her as she called on him, and she moved forward with what she had to do. She said, I did not have anxiety that day. God just gave me a peace that I had all day long. God, we call on God, he will help us. God can slay the giants in our paths, or whatever those giants may be. And you can share her testimony if you'd like to. You may have one like it you might share. But encourage your class. God can slay the giants in our paths, whatever they are, if we'll claim his promises and take the steps of faith that he calls us to take. Then point 3, then the reply of faith found in verses 30 and 31. It says, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the man who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. Interesting, verse 30 says, Caleb quieted the people. Evidently, they're very upset and very vocal in their response to the spies' discouraging report. But it says Caleb quieted them. The Hebrew word is actually hus, from hassa, which is very similar to our hush. So Caleb told everybody, hush, stop your shouting, stop your hysterical, fearful shouting. By the way, Numbers 14:6 also tells us it was not only Caleb, but also Joshua who stood against the majority report. Caleb gave a more positive report in the second part of verse 30. He says, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. Matthew Henry and several other commentaries make much of the fact that Caleb uses the word take possession of, not conquer the land. It says God's promised us the land. Let's just go take possession of what God has already given us. God said it's yours, so go get it. He says we will surely overcome it, an expression of faith. Why did he believe they were able to take the land? Because they were so strong and powerful? No, because God had promised them the land, and that's important. Listen, genuine faith is always based on a word from God. Genuine faith is always responding to something that God has called us to do. We see that emphatically in Hebrews 11, where those who are in the hall of faith are all lauded for having faith, but their faith was always a response to a word from God. It says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God in verse 7, built an ark. So he did what God told him to do. That was his faith. By faith, Abraham, verse 8, when he was called, went out to the land God promised. Abraham didn't just decide to go somewhere. God called him to go, and he went. Verse 11 says, Sarah considered him faithful who had promised. So again, Sarah's faith was a response to God's promise, to his word. And so throughout the chapter, biblical faith always responds to something God has first said. Biblical faith is not us just deciding to claim something that we want God to do for us. That is the modern word faith movement. Name it, claim it. That is not biblical faith. Biblical faith is not just us deciding to claim something. Biblical faith is always a response to something God commanded us in his word to do. There's a big difference, right? Make sure your faith is in what God has promised in his word, not just something you have decided to dream up and claim. So God had promised Israel this land. Caleb had faith to take him up on his word, despite all the big obstacles that appeared to be in their way. Sadly, Caleb was not joined in his faith by the majority of his countrymen. Verse 31 indicates they completely negated what he said. They said, we are not able to go up against the people. They are too strong for us. The Hebrew language here is the exact opposite, the negation of what Caleb had just said. He said, we should by all means go up. They said, we are not able to go up. Caleb had faith that God could give them the land despite the difficulties. Most of the spies, and sadly the people too, as we will see, did not have that faith. The discussion application question you could share here. As we apply this lesson, you might tell your class, I'm going to ask you 2 easy questions, and then what is perhaps a more difficult question. First question, who here in Numbers 13 displeased God? Of course, the easy answer is the spies who didn't believe they could take the land. Who here in Numbers 13 pleased God? Well, that would be Caleb, right? Who believed that they could take the land. Now the more difficult question. Which of these 2 are you more like today? Are you showing in some area of your life today that you really have faith, that you really believe God? Or are you showing by your words and your deeds and your attitudes that you do not have faith in him? Are you pleasing God, or are you not pleasing him by your faith? See, Numbers 13 here is not just a history lesson. It challenges all of us to remember what Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. If we want to be pleasing to God, we've got to show faith towards him, especially faith in what he has clearly revealed to us in his word. So for application, you could ask, in what area of my life today is God asking me to take a step forward in faith? Maybe you've been kind of dealing with God or wrestling with God, like, Lord, can I scout it out like Israel did? Can I get a fleece? Instead of just moving forward in faith. And you might also ask, in what area might God be calling our church to move forward in faith? Is there something we pretty much all know as a church God wants us to do? Maybe start a certain ministry. Maybe we need to move forward with a building. Maybe we need to take a difficult biblical stand on something. We know what we should do, but like Israel, we're fearful, we're doubting, we're hesitant to move forward. Remember what Hebrews 10:38 says, my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, God says, my soul takes no pleasure in him. That ought to be our greatest motivation to respond in faith. We don't want God to take no pleasure in us, like he says in Hebrews 10. We don't want him to loathe us, like he says he loathed that faithless generation of Israel in Psalm 95. Let's seek to please God by believing in him and stepping forward in faith, even when there are what look like some difficult obstacles ahead. Well, we're going to take up this story a little bit more next week as we come to Numbers chapter 14. But I hope there's something that in this overview that will be helpful to you and that you can use as you get ready for your lesson this week. Remember, if you'd like to get a text version of this overview to read, to print it out and use it, or just get one of the quotes or stories, you can get that on my blog at www.ShawnThomas.com. I'll post that address in the comment section below. If you'll hit subscribe, hit the little bell on the YouTube video, YouTube will automatically send you next week's video, and you won't have to search for it. If you write anything in the comment section below, I'll be sure to pray for you and for your group by name this week. Per my licensing agreement with Lifeway, these weekly lessons are based on content from Explore the Bible Adult Resources. The presentation is my own. It has not been reviewed by Lifeway. Lifeway resources are available at goexplorethebible.com and goexplorethebible.com/adults-training. If you have questions about Explore the Bible resources, you can send emails to explorethebible@lifeway.com. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again next time.